to move on to the next section on advice, so the future of advice. And I just wanted to set this up with a few of our thoughts at NextWealth about our thoughts about what's happening with advice. I think there's been a number of different comments around around consolidation, around the number of advisors, around the regulatory burden sitting on that sits with advisors. I think it's important to look at some data. So Mark mentioned the number of advisors, but in terms of the shape of the market, about half of financial advice firms are sole traders. And when we think about looking forward, I mean, looking forward 10 years is quite tough, but looking forward 3 to 5 years, do we expect there to be new sole trader businesses setting up to be able to replace those who are retiring or exiting the market? And what implications will that have for the shape of the advice market? 85% of financial advice firms have 5 or fewer advisors giving advice to customers. And this is FCA data from last June, which is the most recent data that they have available. There's been a 3% increase in the number of advisors. It's not getting us to the numbers that Mark was talking about that that we had in the 80s, but there is a slow increase in the number of advisors and a slow decrease in the number of firms. Now, we thought one of the most interesting bits out of the FCA data that came out last June was that larger firms are earning more per advisor, and that gap is widening. So if you look at the comparison year to year, larger firms are figuring out how to run their businesses more efficiently. So we don't see the demise of the small advice firm. There's room for a number of different business models, but looking at the data and the burden on some of those smaller firms and the investments for cybersecurity and technology and all of the systems that are backing up those businesses, we think it's getting harder to run a small advice business. And I mentioned the research that we did for Fidelity already in my opening remarks, but one of the other things that came out of that was really interesting was that sole traders, a quarter of them, said that one of their top 3 business challenges was succession planning. It didn't come up from advisors of bigger firms, as you'd expect, but then it raises that question, are we going to be seeing a retiring of those smaller advice, the sole traders, and will they be replaced at the same rate? And that will that change the structure of the advisor market? We think that while we hadn't seen the numbers reflected in the June figures from the FCA last year, that we are starting to see this tipping point towards consolidation. There's a number of consolidators very active in the market. They're not particularly interested in sole trader firms, so we haven't seen movement at that part of the market, but in that 2 to 5 advisor space, we think we are seeing momentum towards consolidation. But again, will that be the model 10 years' time? We don't know, but at the point we're at right now, we think it is getting harder to run that small firm. And we think we are seeing this move back towards an appointed rep model. And advisors that we speak to often say that they prefer that model because of the risk that they need to take on to be directly authorized. So we think we're seeing that move back to appointed rep. So that's our thoughts on what's happening in the advice market and some data that's available.